Now, Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Zuko Godlimpi, departs for Russia tomorrow, where he will be at the 14th BRICS Trade Ministers Meeting on Friday. This meeting will be preceded by a roundtable discussion themed the place of BRICS in the new architecture of the international economic system. He joins us now via link. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Perhaps let's start off right at the beginning. Your broad understanding of the theme of this roundtable discussion and what the new architecture is about.
Thank you very much, Mpo. So the theme is not really as it were. It's been the central strategic question that BRICS is posing about the future of the global trade environment. And the key issue has been about what is it that BRICS wants to do the global trade system in the interest of promoting of the developed world. And what we are now discussing this time, of course, is to pay attention to some of the institutional changes the BRICS countries want to introduce. And after that, it includes discussions about how the World Trade Organization must be reformed as well as part of improving the architecture of trade. So BRICS countries, whenever they meet, we do have to consider the state of transformation in the global architecture and propose some reforms that we think can improve global trade and improve it in a manner that promotes the interest of the developing world more, to have a fairer, more equitable and just global trade architecture overall.
Yeah. Deputy Minister, in his opening of Parliament address last week, we heard President Cyril Ramaphosa focusing on strategic priorities like inclusive economic growth and job creation. What kind of opportunity does such a meeting provide South Africa in exploring these new areas of economic and trade cooperation?
So if you think about the population dynamic of the groups, of BRICS group of countries, you arrive at the conclusion that they have one of the largest markets in the world. China, India, account for something close to a third or close to half of the global population as well. So from a purchasing power point of view, developments in BRICS countries provide South Africa with potentially lucrative markets for South Africa's export commodities. So when we talk about South Africa's internal economic transformation and exploring export markets for South African products, we have to think about the BRICS group of countries in those strategic terms. So it does provide us with a platform to build the South African economy at the back of secured markets at that level. So the BRICS group of countries really is quite vital to South Africa's development prospects and deepening its manufacturing output. And so we provide employment in South Africa at the back of improving industrial activity, and you improve industrial activity at the back of securing external markets for your products. So in that manner, there is a very direct link between what we're trying to do at home and what the BRICS group of countries provide us in terms of market access.
South Africa, we know, has been very vocal about its broad intention to use the bloc to advance Africa's interests, like a reform of global governance institutions, international trade, and the work of the Group of 20. What would you say to the criticism around it's all very well and good to want to leverage off these opportunities, but question whether or not you as a country perhaps have a clear, detailed strategy for achieving such goals? A lot has been said about South Africa's lack of specific objectives, about the ability to now promote African interests in the bloc as we look at the dealings of the individual BRICS members with African states that don't necessarily prioritize the continent's needs, like infrastructure development, regional integration and industrialization.
I think the criticism must be located in its proper context. South Africa has been doing two things. It promotes, on the one hand, the African interest by engaging internally in Africa for increased cooperation of African countries. And you must think, case in point, about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, that South Africa is very central in fast-tracking its resolution. So what that aims to do is to create a scenario where African countries bargain with the rest of the world collectively. And that's the campaign that South Africa has been consistently negotiating, to say African countries will get a better deal when they bargain with all the major economies of the world collectively as opposed to individually. And that has to do with an attempt to try transform the relationship that Africa has with the rest of the world, including with member countries of the BRICS group of nations. And we can take the case in point, for instance, here, China. China is one of the countries that is accused of ill-treating African countries. And South Africa's argument has been, we are better off engaging with China just from a population size point of view. The African population continentally is almost the same size as the Chinese population on its own. And if you are to have a comparative trade relationship with China, you need to do it as a collective bloc of the African economy as a whole. And therefore, so South Africa, the idea that South Africa doesn't have specifics out of this relationship is unfounded, because we treat the AfCFTA as part of our negotiating chip when we talk to the rest of the BRICS world, but the rest of the world as well. Even in negotiations with the Western economies as well, we've been insisting that they've got to be done on the basis of a collective pool of African countries, and that the AfCFTA is a vital step towards that direction. On the front of global governance, just say President Cyril Ramaphosa led the African Heads of State mission to try and negotiate a deal in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And that delegation was received quite positively, including by the Russian head of state and the Ukrainian head of state, in recognizing that South Africa's presence was not just as a single country, but was coming together with the rest of Africa, as that mission demonstrated. So South Africa has a tested record of carrying the rest of the African continent in its global conversations that it is having. And the inclusion of Egypt and Ethiopia into the group of countries also bears testimony to the consistency of South Africa in promoting the integration of the rest of the African continent to the global trade and global governance conversations.
As you mentioned Egypt, how are you hoping to leverage on trade and investment from the addition of the new members to BRICS, being two African countries? You speak about Egypt. More so, I mean, as we look to what you were touching briefly on, the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Okay, if I got your question correctly, you are asking how are we planning on leveraging the presence of two African countries in the BRICS
on trade
group
and
of countries.
investment.
Is that the question?
Yes, that's it.
In trade and investment. Yes. So that's the whole purpose. The more African countries you have as part of that arrangement, the more you are likely going to improve the African voice in not just mobilizing higher rates of investment into the African continent, but also to improve the strategic bargaining that Africa has with the rest of the BRICS member countries in discussing a transformation of the terms of trade that exist amongst us. So one of the things that we all know is that Africa currently is a net exporter of raw minerals to especially China and India, and that in turn we import a great deal of manufactured products from those two member countries of the BRICS group of nations. So part of the conversation right now is really to get them to agree with us to change the terms of trade so that Africa beneficiates more of its mineral products internally. And I do believe that between us and Egypt and any other African country that joins the grouping, we will be able to insist on that point, that the quality of investment we want for African countries is investment that builds industrial capability internally in African countries, as opposed to investing only in raw minerals. So on that front, both South Africa and Egypt are in agreement that Africa's manufacturing sector must be built, and it must be built at the back of quality investments that are focused on building industrial capacity this side.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, speaking to us ahead of departing for Russia tomorrow, Zuko Godlimpi, where he will be at the 14th BRICS Summit taking place in the new architecture of the international economic system.